Thursday, August 11th, 2016. Monaco 64 here, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. I'm going to talk about central banks and specifically the Bank of England and who owns it or controls it. In terms of ownership, from 1694, when the Bank of England was formed by or created by royal charter, until 1946, when the Bank of England was nationalized under the Labour government, the new Labour government that came into power after World War II. The Bank of England was actually privately owned by shareholders, but they didn't divulge the shareholders because the Bank of England was privately owned. And because of its royal charter, it did not need to give any information pertaining to its operations or ownership. I've got an interesting source here. It's called A History of Central Banking and the Enslavement of Mankind. It's by Stephen Mitford Goodson. And on page 45, he talks about the nationalization of the Bank of England. And he says, and I quote, "On February 14th, 1946, the Labour government nationalized the Bank of England. The shareholders received treasury notes to the value of £11,015,100, which were redeemable after 20 years. The nationalization, which supposedly placed the bank under public control, did not introduce any change to the privately run system of fractional reserve banking and was undertaken purely for propaganda purposes as the Labour Party's nationalization program of certain financial and industrial concerns." He goes on to say, on April 6th, 1974, the Bank of England established the Bank of England Nominees Limited, company registration number 1307478, a wholly owned subsidiary with private shareholders holding its 100 £1 shares, of which 50% were sold. There is a suspicion that this rearrangement of the bank's affairs represents a reverse takeover of it by private shareholders. In view of the fact that certain aspects of the Bank of England's operations are protected by its royal charter, Section 27(9) of the Companies Act of 1976 and the Official Secrets Act of 1989, and therefore not subject to public and parliamentary scrutiny, there may well be substance to this allegation. So still a mystery. So with that in mind, I'd like to touch upon a debate that took place in 1940, in April 1940. That's when the war between Germany and Great Britain was really picking up. I think it's when the Battle of Britain really started. And there's a debate in the House of Commons. I'll put the link to the source below. And it's an MP called Richard Stokes, and he asks the Chancellor of the Exchequer whether it will introduce legislation to alter the charter of the Bank of England so as to enable the names of the proprietors, together with the capital holding of each of such proprietors, to be published. And Sir John Simon, the Chancellor, answers the question in the House of Commons, and he says, "No, sir." And then Mr. Stokes replies in Parliament, and this is all public information. He says, "In view of the disastrous policy followed by the Bank of England after the last war, and the part that they are believed to have played in the rearmament of Germany, does the right honourable gentleman not consider it time that the people knew a bit more about the proprietors of this unique concern?" And Sir John Simon says, "No, sir," he doesn't think it is. The other point I'd like to make is about, how people, young people especially, are taught history, and why it's important to do your own homework and not depend on the educational system. I take a source here. It's a book by Eric Butler from 1941, and it's called The Enemy Within the Empire, Short History of the Bank of England. And in the introduction, he says, those who seek to rewrite history find it a very formidable undertaking because it has become a vested interest with the official historians. Any historian who refused to portray Cromwell as a savior of the British people pointed out that his real name was Williams and that he belonged to a small group of men who had been enriching themselves at the expense of the monarchy and the people, while bringing a group of foreigners from Holland to batten on the British people, who would not find his book recommended for use in our schools or universities. So that's why it's so difficult, and there's so much mystery surrounding these questions. Part of the reason. And Mr. Butler in his book goes on to say, it's called The Prelude in Britain, and he says, it is essential that we make ourselves conversant with the growth of the forces which paved the way for the establishment of the Bank of England and the debt system. Anyone who cares to study British history during the 6.5 centuries from the Norman conquest, that's 1066, until the financiers arrived at the invitation of Cromwell, and they arrived from Holland, will find that the monarchy did exercise its sovereign right of issuing money. And he just goes on to say, how Britain or England flourished before the Bank of England. He goes on to say, in Queen Elizabeth's reign, Elizabeth I, Britain produced some of the finest minds the world has ever seen. Both Bacon and Shakespeare had a tremendous influence on Western civilization, particularly Bacon, to whom we chiefly owe the modern system of experimental science based on inductive reasoning. So, now more towards the Bank of England. And he talks about now, and I quote him as well, the formation of the Bank of England. So, and I quote, the modern banking system did not exist in Britain until Cromwell's regime. In his History of England, Macaulay says that banking had not started at the time of the Restoration, 1660. Merchants had their strong boxes and paid out honest coin on demand. So, and he goes on to talk about William Paterson, who was, the official, man behind the Bank of England. And he quotes, whatever the present supporters of the banking swindle may say, the man who was primarily responsible for the Bank of England frankly admitted what he was doing. And he goes on to say, in the plan for forming the bank, which he drew up at the time, he said, that's William Paterson, and I quote, the bank hath benefit of interest on all monies which it creates out of nothing. So basically, the Bank of England was formed to finance the monarchy, even though the monarchy could have financed itself, but with the prerogative, the power of the sovereign to issue its own money. So, and it goes on to say, needless to say, the majority of the Whigs favored the establishment of the bank. The first governor was Sir John Doublon, a Dutchman. So there you go. The Dutch merchants, a lot of them were Christian. A lot of them were Marrano Jews as well. They were merchants that came from Portugal and Spain earlier, I think over 100 years before, to Holland. So pretty interesting. And in terms of the owner, and he goes on to say about the ownership of the Bank of England, and I quote, the ownership of the Bank of England has always been a matter of much speculation, although its close contact with international finance is well known. In 1696, the law laid it down that stock in the bank might be held by any and every persons, native and foreigners, bodies, politic and corporate, who may subscribe. So there you go. It can be foreigners. And another interesting point about the Bank of England and the nature of the Bank of England, and I take this also from The Enemy Within, and I quote, it says, the following interesting report in connection with the Bank of England appeared in the Manchester Guardian on December 28, 1839, and was republished in the paper on January 6, 1940. And I'll finish with this, part of the book, this article, and I quote, a special general meeting of the Manchester Chamber of Commerce and Manufacturers was held at their offices, Town Hall Building, King Street, on Thursday last to receive a report from the Board of Directors on the effects of the administration of the Bank of England upon commercial and manufacturing interests of the country. The report of the meeting, which ran to 5.5 columns, contained the lengthy report of the directors on the bank, the concluding paragraphs of which were, and I quote, although it scarcely comes within the scope of this present object, the board will add a reflection upon the subject of the unique privileges possessed by the Bank of England, that such a power over the property and as has been the health, morals, and the very lives of the community should be vested in the hands of 26 irresponsible individuals for the exclusive benefit of a body of bank proprietors must be regarded as one of the most singular anomalies of the present day, that the secret of these individuals, veiled as they are even from the eyes of their constituents, should decide the fortunes of our capitalists and the fate of our artisans, that upon the error or wisdom of their judgment should depend the happiness or misery of millions, and that against the most capricious exercise of this power there should be neither appeal nor remedy. That such a state of things should be allowed to exist must be regarded as a reproach to the intelligence of the age, and totally irreconcilable with every principle of public justice. And it continues, if instead of having been handed down to us from our ancestor, it had been proposed in the present day to create a joint stock bank to be endowed with the power and privileges enjoyed by the Bank of England, the common sense of the country would have revolted against the attempt to establish so dangerous a monopoly. So there you have it. That's the power behind the Bank of England. It's a monopoly, secretive monopoly with a royal charter, privately owned from 1694 until 1946, supposedly nationalized but in 1946, but still very secretive. And, it has, as Mr. Mitford says here in his book, and, it says, in view of the fact that certain aspects of the Bank of England operation are protected by its royal charter, and therefore not subject to public and parliamentary scrutiny, there may well be substance to this allegation. So the Bank of England is totally autarkic. It's a bit like the Federal Reserve when someone asked Alan Greenspan, who controls the Fed, and he said, no one. So there you go. Who owns the Bank of England? I don't think we'll ever know, or maybe we will. Since from 1694 to 1946, no one found out, and nowadays it's very confusing and complicated. But certainly, in my opinion, who controls the Bank of England are the same people who control the big financial institutions. That for sure, I think is true. That's another subject, to find out who controls all the big financial institutions. And even then it will be difficult because all the owners are hidden behind companies and trusts. So like my video, please like, share, and subscribe. And you can also donate if you'd like to my channel. The links are below. You can donate via PayPal, Bitcoin, or through Patreon. Thanks for watching. Bye.